So we're going to prepare tooth number 18 for a gold onlay. The first thing that we'll do is check the occlusion, as we would with any time you do a restoration, whether it's direct or indirect. You want to have an idea of what the occlusion is like. And one of the interesting things, even though this is a class 1 recreation on this typodont, we don't have a perfect cusp-fossa relationship between tooth number 18 and tooth number 15 up above. And so if we were to prepare this tooth strictly based upon the anatomy of the tooth and reduce the proper amounts and follow all of the guidelines with this preparation, we would actually be over-reduced in terms of clearance from the opposing tooth and maybe take off more tooth structure than we need to. So you need to make a decision at this point. Am I going to prepare this tooth to be restored in the shape that it is now, so it has the same general form that it has right now, or am I going to possibly improve the occlusion a little bit and be mindful of the biology and reduce a little less tooth structure and base the reduction off clearance from the opposing tooth, number 15. And so I want to show you a way, when the occlusion doesn't line up just right, to base your reduction upon your clearance and not necessarily just the shape of the tooth. We're going to start off using the shape of the tooth as a guide with guide cuts, but then we're going to focus on clearance after that. Normally, these types of restorations, gold onlays, are done in situations where there's an existing restoration of some kind, maybe a medium to large size filling, direct filling. Maybe the tooth had a root canal and needs cuspal coverage for some reason, and we're trying to be as conservative of tooth structure as we can. A gold onlay is a really good choice for that. So we'll start just by showing where this lines up. So when we have the patient close together and view this from the buccal aspect, we can see that again, not a really good cusp-fossa relationship. And so as we refine this, we're going to pay very close attention to that. So I will start off with just doing some basic guide cuts. My overall target clearance occlusally is 1.5 to 2 millimeters across the functional cusps and 1 to 1.5 on the non-functional cusps on the lingual. So I'm going to start with the 1557 burr, the carbide burr, which is really nice for doing depth cuts because it's 1 millimeter in diameter. And if I stay at this point at 1 millimeter reduction from the anatomy of the tooth we're preparing, that's shy enough of our target clearance that we can refine it based upon tooth number 15, the tooth on top. So let's start with our guide cuts. I'll do the major grooves, and I'll go ahead and get our suction involved here because I can do this directly. So the major grooves, and then I'll do the triangular ridges as well. This is the lingual groove. And then this mesial lingual area. And while I'm at it now, I'll do the triangular ridges. And this one over here. I want to go ahead and do the functional cusp bevel while I'm at it, and I've got the handpiece kind of turned in this direction. I lengthen my burr just a little bit for that. But I'm going to stay a little shy on this because this is where most of that difference occurs. So I will start out on the buccal groove, and I'll do a light guide cut up here on the mesial, and another one there, and then I'll come back here and here. I'm keeping these a little bit lighter, and then I'll turn and do the functional cusp reduction. And then we'll connect our guide cuts. This will just give us a rough idea of the occlusal reduction. This spur is starting to dull a little bit, but I think I can make it last. So we've got a rough occlusal reduction now, and now I'm going to really focus in. I want to start getting the functional cusp bevel right. Once I have that right, I can then measure in further to the functional cusp and the non-functional cusp. So let's look at this when the patient closes together, and we soon realize that we have an opposing triangular ridge that is right there. And so I'm going to put a little guide cut right opposing where that triangular ridge was up on top. That's really where my new buccal groove is going to be, is right there. So let's see if we've lined it up right. Looks pretty good. The distal buccal cusp is going to be right about there. And we'll do a little guide cut there to kind of help us. Those will be low spots in terms of clearance, and that one doesn't need to come much more because of just the reduction that we've already done. But we do need to define this new buccal groove that's now kind of moved mesially a little bit. And a little bit more here. I'm going to lengthen that burr again a little bit. And we probably still have just a little bit more to do there toward the mesial. And this is our functional cusp bevel. So now I'm going to get a diamond out. We're going to start working inward. It really wouldn't matter whether you wanted to use your torpedo diamond. That's a reasonable one to use here to start refining this. Or you could use your chamfer diamond. One of the larger chamfer diamonds will work just very well, either the 6878K018 or the 6878K016. And that's now kind of what that functional cusp bevel begins to look like, as it better follows the anatomy of the opposing tooth structure. So again, we want to be between 1.5 and 2. This is my 1.5 measuring device. That seems to go in there with ease. So I know that I'm past the 1.5, and I'm guessing that I may even be approaching or past, but yeah, it's a little tight with the 2. So I'm kind of in that zone now of 1.5 to 2, and that's where I want to leave it. So now I want to move inside and do the same thing. So we'll use our diamond for this part. Remember, we're on the functional cusp, so we want to keep the reduction amount a little bit greater than the non-functional. So let's check our occlusion, see how we're doing. We can start to go in a little bit further now with this, our 1.5, and see that our clearance is proper. We're just slightly under reduced going over that mesial buccal cusp tip, and I can reduce that a little bit. Once I'm into the central fossa area, it's pretty close. So let's see what it looks like when we come from the distal. Again, yep, that's very good. So we're greater than 1.5, and then we could go on into the lingual cusp. Here's a 1 millimeter. I want to be at least that or more, and I'm able to get that on the distal, and I'm able to get that on the mesial. So our clearance looks good. There's just one spot on the mesial buccal cusp tip we'll worry about. I'll refine that a little bit. Again, most of the time when you're doing this preparation, you're dealing with a tooth that's usually got some damage through the middle area. We don't have that with this typodont tooth, but that's what we're going to simulate next, is by cutting an isthmus and box forms. So with that, we'll move to, I could use the 1557 to do kind of the rough out, and I think I will do that. And then I'll refine it with my KR diamond, which we'll use here in just a minute. So I'm just going to simulate that we have an isthmus going through the center part there that's going to be dropped down a little bit. Whenever you're doing working interproximally, I recommend as much as possible to use direct vision if you can. And so I'm able to directly visualize this as I drop a box toward the mesial aspect, making sure as I do this, I've got to create some flare, buccal to lingual, with my box. I don't want to create an undercut. You can't truncate these boxes, and if there's one there from an existing filling, you have to make sure that you open it up and put a taper to it, an internal taper, and we'll do the same on the distal here. And that's about it. Just something to give us a rough idea that we had a restoration there that we've taken out. And even if you didn't, your isthmus is going to contribute to your resistance and retention form. So you'll want one with this preparation anyway. So it's roughed out now. I want to refine it, and that's when I'm going to use this KR diamond. It's a flat-ended diamond, and it's the same shape and size as a 172 carbide burr. So we'll use that now to refine our isthmus first. When you do this, it's important, you've got to keep in the back of your mind all the time that I'm creating a taper to this preparation. So I need to kind of force myself to lean to the buccal when I'm working on the buccal wall of the isthmus, and conversely to lean to the lingual when I'm working on the lingual wall of the isthmus. Otherwise, I tend to, even with a tapered burr like this burr has built into it a 6-degree taper. And it's very easy, even with that built in, for us to create undercuts with these. Let's see how that looks now. It's looking pretty good. We could emphasize that taper just a little bit more. Like I say, it's real easy to get an undercut through here if we're not careful. And that looks good there. And then we'll move to our box forms and just refine them. I don't have to be right up next to my adjacent tooth because I've got plenty of space here. Don't risk scraping that adjacent tooth. Again, always use, if you can, direct vision when you're interproximal. The other part of these box forms that has to have a taper to it is the axial wall of the mesial box needs to taper toward the axial wall of the distal box. Otherwise, you'll have an undercut between them. So I'm going to go now to my distal box and do the same thing that I did at the mesial and just put a little definition to it and put some taper to the walls. Again, kind of accentuating that. Okay, we are getting very close. It looks like we've got the taper there. I'm just going to blow some of that tooth dust off to make sure of it. Yeah, I could make my distal box just a little more uniform and bring the axial depth in toward the buccal just a little bit. Like that. So the isthmus is completed, the box forms are completed, and what you'll notice on your preparation at this point is you have these fins of enamel that are left, if they are. If this was a tooth that you were doing clinically and taking an old restoration out, you probably wouldn't have those. On this typodont tooth with this exercise, it's likely that you will, but they can easily be trimmed off when you do your bevel. And that is the final part of this preparation, is to add the bevel that goes all the way around the preparation. We'll start with putting the bevel around the two box forms, and then we'll connect the bevel on the lingual aspect and on the buccal aspect. To do the bevel, we want to use the only fine diamond that you have in your kit, and it's this fine flame shaped diamond right there. It's got the red ring on it, which indicates that it's a fine diamond, and it's got just the right shape for adding the bevels on these box forms. So what I like to do is lay this burr up against the pulpal floor of the box at about the angle that I want to cut the bevel. And I'm going to visualize, okay, I want to cut this bevel. I want to make sure to stay away from the adjacent tooth. And then I want to start the preparation of that bevel. Now it's real easy for the tooth to push you into the adjacent tooth as you go around the edge of the box form and cut that little fin of enamel off. So you have to give it some gas right there. So as you're doing this, you'll start with the bevel at the gingival floor just a little bit, and then you'll wind it up and you'll go out to the lingual, and you'll wind it up and you'll come out to the buccal. Don't let it push you into that adjacent tooth. These bevels around your box forms, it's real easy to get an undercut if you don't complete the bevel in its entirety. So a couple of quick passes through will help you see the bevel all the way, and that bevel's completed now. Now we'll move back to the distal box form, and these two bevels should lean towards it. They should taper towards each other just a little bit. So I'll do the same thing back here. The mesial one's done. The distal one, I'll just lay the burr against that pulpal floor, right against the margin, and then I'll just refine a nice little beveled margin. I'll come out to the buccal, and I'll complete the gingival aspect in just a nice kind of a smooth, kind of a swiping motion. And now that bevel is complete back there. So I need to refine it at the distal lingual just a teeny tiny bit. Ever so slightly. And again, be careful not to undercut it. So these two bevels should taper towards each other, and it looks like they do. And then the final part of this preparation is to just take this fine diamond and go along and create a bevel on the buccal. And that's just right at the edge of our occlusal reduction. And then on the lingual, it's going to be a little bit more pronounced. On the buccal, you're kind of cutting that bevel at the same angle as your occlusal reduction on your functional cusp bevel. But on the lingual, you're actually going to create a beveled margin. So you'll change the angle, and you're using this same diamond the whole way. And what this does, it just connects the bevels around both boxes with one another. And as you know, bevels tighten up margins on castings when the casting is properly sized or a little smaller. And we are just about there. If you have any, at this point, if you had any sharp areas of your preparation internally, you might soften them. It's not rounding at all, but I do have a couple of sharp areas, and I'm just going to take those off because they tend to cause problems, as you know, with wax-ups, impressions, and just the manufacturing. They can break off in your model. And so if you've got a real sharp edge, just take it off, soften it a little bit, don't round it, and do a final check of our occlusion. And you'll notice on this that we've now better matched the shape of our tooth number 15 that this tooth opposes, and we've conserved a little tooth structure in the process and created an opportunity for a little better fit in a cusp-fossa relationship with the opposing tooth structure. And that preparation is now complete and ready for impression.